Hello, good morning, and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
It's Wednesday, December the 11th, the penultimate Prime Minister's Questions of 2024. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico. Today feels like a day slightly of political drudgery, cleaning up messes and trying to get stuck into intractable problems, Jack. But before we get onto all of that, there is one kinetic, noisy and explosive row that has really caught my eye. Have you seen what's been going on with Kemi Badenoch and Nigeria and the Nigerian government?
I love that as soon as you say the words kinetic, explosive row, there's only one person at the top of British politics who could possibly be talking about Kemi. I don't like having fights. Badenoch appears to be having a fight with what she calls her nation of origin. This emerged yesterday, Sam. I mean, Kemi Badenoch's talked about Nigeria and her childhood in Nigeria a lot during the Tory leadership race. And it seems that people in Nigeria, or at least leaders in Nigeria, aren't too happy with the way that she talks about the country.
The vice president, no less, of Nigeria, which is, as you say, where Kemi spent a large part of her childhood, has gone all out during a speech on migration to attack her. He says that she has been denigrating Nigeria, which is her nation of origin. Kashim Shettima said in the speech, "She is entitled to her own opinions. She has even every right to remove the Kemi from her name, but that does not underscore the fact that the greatest black nation on earth is the nation called Nigeria." This row is in the FT this morning, where it actually has quotes a presidential advisor who goes even further, saying that Kemi makes Nigeria sound like a leper colony. We live here and don't have that impression of our country. It's not 100% clear which statements they're responding to, but she has described growing up in Nigeria as an experience where there was the government was racked by corruption, there was dysfunction, and the government showed her the ills of socialism. But what I enjoy about this story, as so often with stories involving Kemi Badenoch, is her response. A spokesman for Kemi Badenoch said, "Kemi..."
So she backs down and apologises, does she, Sam? And says, "I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have said these terrible things about the country I grew up in." Is that something like that?
No, the spokesman quote is, "Kemi is not interested in doing Nigeria's PR. She is the leader of the opposition in the UK." So that's the sound of that book being slammed shut, and I don't expect this one to get any easier. Anyway, perhaps we'll get that version of Kemi out at Prime Minister's Questions later. But should we start off with the major announcement of the government today?
Yeah, the government is going in on prisons today. The biggest immediate crisis inherited by Labour when they came into power in July was undoubtedly the state of Britain's prisons. This is the one area of public services, or indeed could include the public finances, where even Tories would agree that they probably didn't leave a really great inheritance for Labour to pick up. The crisis in Britain's prisons was such, as we remember, when Labour came in, they instantly had to start letting prisoners out early, or they felt they did, because there was literally no room left in prisons that were already dangerous and overcrowded. We've seen repeated early releases of prisoners through the last few months to try and ease a bit of the overcrowding in Britain's jails. What we're seeing today, Sam, is a first concrete step into how Labour is actually going to try and tackle this crisis, or at least says how it's going to tackle this crisis in the more medium term. And we're seeing an announcement today from Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, who's already all over broadcast interviews this morning, saying that they're going to build 4 new big prisons around the country over the next few years that are going to that's going to increase prison capacity significantly and at least ease some of the pressure on Britain's prisons. Now, even the government is saying that this is not going to be enough to solve the problem. In fact, almost from reading between the lines of the Ministry of Justice press release, they think it's a bit of a drop in the ocean. But nevertheless, it is a concrete plan. It is one pillar of the approach that they're going to take to try and improve the state of Britain's prisons.
what's interesting about this isn't just the announcement that they're building more prisons, but also that they're basically saying we're building more prisons, whatever the objections that we get from local communities. So if you remember, the Tories promised 20,000 new spaces by the mid-2020s, but by the time they left office, only around 6,000 had been built. So that's partly Conservative disorganisation, the chaos of the last handful of governments and the like, but also because planning objections play a role when trying to build these things, and they get in the way. Now, what Labour is saying is that they're going to build new sites at Lancashire, in Yorkshire, in Buckinghamshire and Leicestershire. So those are the four places where you're going to get approximately 6,400 new prison cells built. But they're also saying that they're adjusting the planning rules to prevent building delays by making prisons infrastructure sites of national importance. And by doing that, it removes the ability of councils to object. That's a theme of this week. It was meant to be the biggest theme of the week before other news, particularly foreign news, got in the way, and what was going on in Syria. This plan to sort of reform and revolutionise the state and get Britain building again. And there's going to be more on this, particularly in relation to expanding the grey belt, which is building on the less nice bits of the green belt tomorrow, but putting prison building in the context of the wider planning reforms is one of the arguments that the government is going to sell today, even though it's complicated by two things. First of all, they admit that this doesn't give you enough prison places and that they're going to run out, I think, in 3 years. So even before the building programme is finished. But secondly, as Sky is reporting this morning, my colleague Molly Malone, dozens of prisons across England and Wales are going to have to shut prison cells because they are leaky and unsafe, and basically there's got to be lots of building works. So in 28 different prison facilities, there are cells being taken out of circulation because they are just not safe. And so it's a push me, pull you. It's a very difficult situation. Nobody would doubt that Shabana Mahmood, who has not had an easy time since she became Justice Secretary on a number of fronts, has a very, very difficult job on her hands.
Indeed. It's now been 9 years since David Cameron sacked Chris Grayling as his Justice Secretary, Sam, after what was widely considered in Westminster to be a fairly disastrous tenure in that job. And over the subsequent 9 years, the Tories put 9 different people in the job of Justice Secretary, which gives you an indication of the churn just in that position. So if you're looking for reasons as to why over the past 14 years we haven't had a very effective strategy at the Ministry of Justice, possibly the fact that they change the leader on average every single year might give you some indication. Lots of politicians seeing this job as just a stepping stone to their next position in the cabinet and not really grappling with the big structural long-term problems that the UK prison system was facing. And so here we are. You're right, Boris Johnson made a promise in 2019 that he was going to build loads and loads of prisons, and we got a report from the National Audit Office last week saying that that plan was way behind schedule and way over budget. If you look at the latest projections from the Ministry of Justice, the current prison population in the UK now stands at 86,000, which is really high already. Their projections show that it could rise as high as 105,000 by the end of this decade. As you say, the big 4 new prisons they're planning to build today is only going to create an extra 6,000 spaces. That's nowhere near going to bridge the gap on the current trajectory, which is why that this announcement today is only one part of the problem. And regular listeners will recall that the former Justice Secretary, one of those 9 former Justice Secretaries, in fact, David Gauke, has been commissioned by the government to do a separate piece of work to this, nothing to do with building new prisons, but about sentencing. Because really, the long-term solution, the only long-term solution to this problem that Britain can actually afford, because it can't afford to build loads of prisons, even when they do change the planning laws, is to the only solution that Britain can actually afford is to send less people to prison in the first place. And when David Gawke reports back in the spring, everyone is expecting his sentencing review to come back with different approaches to particularly less serious crimes, so that these sorts of projections that the MOJ are talking about just never come to pass, that we never have a prison population that's over 100,000 people by the end of the decade, because we're simply not going to have enough places to put those people, even in a world where these 4 big shiny new prisons that Shabana Mahmood is announcing today actually get built.
The scale of prison building is ambitious. The plans that Shabana Mahmood is announcing today will be difficult to meet, and even changing the planning rules will not remove all of the obstacles in the way. And there is an injection of capital from the Treasury. There was at the budget in order to help pay for some of this. But as the National Audit Office says, these sorts of building projects, particularly given the rate of inflation, are very, very hard to keep the costs under control. So it'll be an interesting mark of whether or not this government can deliver on its planning agenda as well as its justice agenda, to see whether those 4 facilities open, and when they do. The government in the last week has set itself, when it comes specifically to this question of building, incredibly ambitious target, really eye-watering rhetoric, and it is all falling in Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister's lap, to deliver that. So I think people will rightly expect to be able to hold Angela Rayner to account to see whether she's able to deliver what she says she can.
And the politics of this is really interesting as well. Even though, Labour fully accept that building these new prisons is not going to solve this crisis, they do feel they need to be seen to be doing this. And the reason for that is that the stuff around sentencing and letting prisoners out early and not sending people to prison as much is actually deeply unpopular with the general public. And Labour know that this is sort of a weak spot in their flank in terms of how they present justice policy to the general public. If you ask people out in the country, they are pretty harsh about sentencing and about the state of prisons. If you say to them, thousands and thousands of prisons are in a really poor state, should we spend lots of money bringing them up to standards? A lot of people would just say, no, don't care. If you say to people, should we be taking a different approach to sentencing like they do in some other countries and not always sending people to prison, lots of people say, no, lock them up. And Labour are not keen to push this sort of what they would see as a progressive agenda on this, and yet they are going to have to deliver it. They know that their opponents on the right, in the Tory party, further to the right, in Reform UK, are going to be hammering them hard on this stuff. And so they want to be seen to be building new prisons as well. So at least they've got something else they can point to and say, look, we have actually delivered thousands of new places to lock people up. The Tories never did that in all their years in power. And so don't paint us as being soft on crime and soft on justice. We're absolutely not, they would say. Whether that actually lands with the public remains to be seen. But I think part of the strategy with these prisons, at least they will have them to point to be able to say that.
Should we talk a little bit about Prime Minister's questions and the budget and spending review kind of realities that started to dribble out overnight with the announcement that the government has looked across the board at what it thinks it can afford for public sector pay next year, and decided that it can barely afford now to give a beyond inflation pay settlement to lots of bits of the public sector. So for teachers and people in the NHS, it looks as if the government is recommending to the independent pay review bodies that they should get a 2.8% increase in pay in 25-26, so from the spring of next year. Now, this comes just a week after Keir Starmer announced that increasing people's living standards was his top priority, and that this kind of measure actually makes that goal harder to achieve. It also comes as this government has to deliver better public services, and all around the place you've got unions sabre rattling, not quite promising imminent strikes, but certainly sort of aghast that what they thought was hopefully a pattern of more generous public sector pay increases started in when Labour came into power over the summer with 5% plus annual pay increase, that this government was going to build on that. No, a much more kind of traditionally tight public pay spending settlement now in the offing, meaning almost guaranteeing a much more fractious relationship with public sector unions, just when they're going to be needed to be on the government side when it comes to NHS reform, teacher and school standard improvements and the like.
I think this is not a row, though, that the government is going to be in completely unhappy about. They will turn around and say, look, these are still above inflation pay increases. And the government took a lot of stick certainly from the Tories over the summer for settling with some of the unions in what the Tories said was a sort of over-generous way. I don't think the government wants to be perceived for that to keep happening year after year after year. And so I don't think they'll be terribly unhappy if the trade unions sort of grumble and complain a bit about this, because it gives the impression that Rachel Reeves, the exact impression Rachel Reeves want to give, that she's not some spendthrift, just hand out all the cash to unions year after year after year, that was a sort of one-off situation to end all of the years of strikes that we'd had, and that now, the same prudence is being applied here as being applied elsewhere. Again, it might be too late to land that message. I'm not saying that is how people will see it, but that is certainly how the government will want it to be seen. So I don't think they'll be terribly unhappy to be having this row at this point, unless it escalates into something much more serious.
So to pay for the 2.8% increase in public sector pay, the Treasury will offer precisely nothing additional. So all pay rises that are being signalled today, and they'll be confirmed next year by the pay review bodies themselves, but this gives you a pretty good indication of where things are going to end up, will have to come from departmental budgets, or if it comes to the NHS or schools, from within those budgets themselves. And in the papers this morning, you've got one health official saying that basically the planned £22.6 billion rise in the day-to-day budget of the NHS over 2 years that was announced by the Chancellor in the budget will more or less be swallowed up by next year's pay award, and is already higher than the NHS can really afford. So that gives you a sense of, despite the complaints of the unions, the fears of those actually operating the NHS and the hospital sector, just how they are trapped. And likewise, the Department for Education has been saying that most schools would only be able to cover the proposed 2.8% increase in teachers' pay if they make other efficiencies. And that's because basically the Treasury believes that having done that massive splurge budget, £60 billion of spending, huge borrowing, huge taxing, that's your money for this Parliament, and there'll be no more doled out by the Treasury to departments over the course of this Parliament as we go into the spending review. And that's going to be increasingly tricky sort of all around the place. And those pay awards come against a backdrop of increased living costs all over the place. I was rather taken by a story in the Times this morning in the business section. Energy bills for most British households are set to increase even more in April as the energy cap goes up from £1,738 probably to £1,762. Wholesale prices are going up, so consumer prices are going to go up as well. So these pay awards that people are getting that are meant to make them feel better, even if they're only just above inflation, are going to be swallowed up in part by energy bills, and rising energy bills also contributes to higher inflation all around the board. It's tough out there, and there are no easy answers.
And the backdrop to all of that, Sam, is the government is still facing protests about the budget, which is now 6 weeks ago. And we've said before, haven't we? Let's see how this big budget lands this autumn. Will we all still be talking about it weeks and weeks and weeks after? Well, sure enough, ahead of Prime Minister's questions at noon today, we are expecting convoys of tractors to be heading down Whitehall and around Parliament Square today. I don't know if you're going to be in Westminster today, Sam, but I would definitely go on foot rather than trying to drive around, because we're expecting road closures. We're expecting lots and lots of angry farmers again, this time in their largest farm equipment, and driving around and protesting, of course, about the changes to inheritance tax that were announced on October the 30th. And it's just another very visual representation of how that all-important budget didn't exactly land as smoothly as Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, would have hoped it would. And it seems sort of ironic that, such an important budget that did so many very, very big structural changes to the way Britain does tax and spending, this one pretty small change to inheritance tax, which only raises the government a relatively small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, is the thing that will once again be capturing headlines, and no doubt, we'll be seeing the footage on the evening news bulletins tonight. And I just wonder how regretful Rachel Reeves may be feeling about this now, or whether she really does believe that was still a good decision.
And that's the last word on this podcast, farmers complaining about inheritance tax. So with that memory, we will leave you to your day. We will see you at this time tomorrow for the last one of the week.
All right, see you then. Cheers.